Okay, so this is interview number
3 today.
So it's been, where have we been?
I don't know. I don't know.
No. It's like that being on tour, like being picked up at the airport, just be driven around, making interviews, and it's kind of weird life.
It is a weird life, and it's also just being, dropped off in hotels and, being on the road. And as you get older, it becomes a little bit harder. It was a lot more fun when I was younger, when there were groupies.
Yeah,
when there were a lot of groupies. It's fun to do a book tour at 28, much more fun than it is at 58.
I can imagine.
So, I was talking to someone who, talking to a fellow writer who's my age, and he just couldn't believe that I had agreed to do a book tour at my age, because he said, well, what's the point of going on a book tour if you can't stay up all night and meet girls or boys and do a ton of drugs and just, make sure your publisher moves all your interviews to the late afternoon so you can sleep in.
Yeah.
What's the point? You're going to get up and you're going to do interviews all day? Well, no one holds a gun up to your head when you make a deal with a publisher. And it's different in America. I didn't do a tour in America this time. I didn't want to do a tour in America. I don't like the press in America. I don't like the way they cover me in particular. I don't like the way they cover anything.
So you have some bad experiences with that before? Well,
it's not bad experiences. The literary press finds me somewhat polarizing, and I am the worst reviewed American writer of my generation. Wow. And they hate me for a lot of reasons. Hate me for my subject matter, hate me for the ways I write about sex and about violence and about young people. And it's always been that way. It's not as if it's something new. It happened with my first book. It happened with Less Than Zero, which was published when I was 21. And I think people seem to regard that book as, a book that came right out of the gate and everyone thought was so good and, a book of a generation and everything. Half the reviews were terrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible, with many, many voices in the literary press going, this is the end of publishing. If we can publish the drug journals of a 20-year-old wasted freak, then there's no future in publishing anymore. That a lot of op-eds, a lot of things. And it's been kind of the same ever since in terms of the Americans' reaction toward me. It's different in Europe for some reason. But I bypassed the U.S. tour for this book, for The Shards, just because there's just something going on in the U.S. media right now that has really divided our country. And the most recent poll stated that 90% of Americans do not believe or trust their press. That's a lot of people. And that's both people on the right, people on the left. That's a very scary place to be in. I know that me and my partner, we have to often decode the paper and articles we read in terms of what are they really trying to say?
Yeah.
Why did they bury the lead that the headline says is not true in paragraph 18? It contradicts each other. What is the message they want to get? Anyway, this is all old hat in terms of talking about not doing a U.S. tour. So I didn't do a U.S. tour, and now I'm doing a European tour, and this is the first leg of it, and I'm happy to be here.
So is it like, it must be a little bit different to do like podcasts than the traditional interviews with the media, with papers, because they cherry pick what they want to include. But the podcast format, in my view, is much more honest and unedited and more real.
Of course, and I think that's probably why they caught on. I have a podcast that I do every week in Los Angeles, and I know that though we do edit it, we lightly edit it for pacing problems, and if someone wants to re-say something, we'll edit that. But more or less, we let them speak freely for 2 hours. And I also often use the podcast as a way to just review films and to talk about bands I like and books that I've read. And so the format, yes, there is a freedom to the format that I do prefer to doing a traditional newspaper interview or a magazine interview or something of those sorts. But those also, if you are going to form a partnership with your publishing house and agree to a tour, well, they know what they're doing to a degree. They know. I'm just not so sure in terms of doing press for a book, how much it helps sales. And I've always been somewhat concerned about this to a degree. Not concerned about the sales because on one level, I don't care. I wanted to write the book. I wrote the book. I write very infrequently, so I'm not a career writer. It's kind of like a hobby for me. But I often have wondered about how much press really helps sell a book, or if it's just like word of mouth. If people really like it and they keep recommending it to people. People say TikTok helps right now. And I just did my first 2 TikToks last night, somewhat embarrassed as a 58-year-old man. And I'm not dancing around or anything. It was a TikTok to just introduce what The Shards was, the new novel, and then to do another TikTok because the young girl who was shooting me knew exactly what to do and knew what to do with me and what I should say and what author I should talk about. But I guess those helps. I guess it also helps being picked by a good book club. Good book club can help get readers. And in my case, it's been controversy has also helped. So, but I don't know, doing like 30 interviews, does that really move a book? I'm not sure anymore. I don't know.
You remind me a little bit of, the French author Michel Houellebecq.
Of course. I'm in the middle of reading his collected essays right now.
Yeah, it's great. He's one of my favorites. And
yes, he's my favorite living European writer.
Yeah. Yes. What do you like about him?
Well, I like about him what I like about any writer. Authenticity. Authenticity. A fearlessness. There's not a pose there.
Is that a feeling?
He's not posing. He's not posing. No. There's a lot of posers out there. There are a lot of people who want to be literary, who want to win a prize, who want to please the critics. Michel is just his own man, and he is fearless in his honesty in terms of how he sees the world. He doesn't, I think a lot of people censor themselves now. Michel Houellebecq doesn't, and he gets into some trouble. He gets a lot of criticism for it, but he is, I believe, at least he's written 3 or 4 of the great European novels of his generation, and he is my favorite living European writer. And I know that the left hates him sometimes, and I don't like to get into politics too much, but I respect his sensibility as an artist more than I do whatever his politics might or might not lean to. But I also, the other thing that's great about Michel Houellebecq is he's funny. He's fucking funny. Yeah. He's funny as hell. And he is so, his books almost always make me laugh. Now, I think the later 2 books have been not as great as the 3 or 4 masterpieces he wrote when he was younger. But, all great writers share that. They're funny. They have humor to them. I think some people might disagree with me about that, but I'd be hard-pressed to think of a lot of great writers that weren't also funny, that they saw something humorous about the absurdity of life, and they captured it.
Do you feel you share a couple of things with his history, like loneliness and the pain, his childhood years?
No, I don't feel that, because my childhood years they might have been solitary, but they were not as painful, I think, as Michel's might be, or as he has talked about. My life was very full. I was a very active child in terms of reading. I loved books. I lost myself in books. I loved films. I saw every movie, and I loved watching television, and I loved listening to music, and I was writing my own books at 5 and 6 and 7, and then I was drawing comic books and graphic novels, and I wrote my first novel at 13 or 14. I was an active kid. I was also playing piano and guitar, and but I was solitary. I was a very solitary child. And really, if I had to look at a main trauma of my childhood, was that my father had checked out. Father wasn't around. Didn't really like the son that he had. Wanted a different son. And that was something I recognized. I noticed it. I felt it at a very young age, that I was not the son my father wanted. My father wanted the big, all-American, sports-loving, kid, not the introvert who's sitting in a corner reading, a paperback, but he wanted like an athlete, and he wanted a real manly man kind of son, and I just wasn't that. So if I had to, otherwise, the older I get and I look at my childhood, I feel somewhat privileged. It was a privileged childhood. But there was that key thing missing, and that is that a boy needs his father. And I recognize that more and more the older I get, how important that relationship is for the development of the son.
Yeah.
Because the people I know, the boys I know, the men I know who had lousy, terrible relationships with their father are far more of a mess than the guys I know who had really good relationships with their father and still have good relationships with their father. I know I still have damages that I still carry with me because I did not have a father, and it's taken years to try to move through them and mend them somehow, But that's but my childhood, and the older I get, I think was nowhere near Michelle's.
So did you bury it, or did you deal with it?
I wrote about it. That's how I deal with everything.
Yeah.
I write about it. And when I resented my father so much. I mean, it bordered on hatred at times. I just couldn't believe that he would treat his family the way he did. I just thought he had an opportunity to, well, who knows? Maybe he ultimately just didn't want to be a dad.
Is he alive?
No, he died very young. He died in 1992, actually. And basically he did not take very good care of himself. And so he died quite young. He died at 50. And anyway, so how I dealt with it, and I hadn't spoken to him for a year before he died. I had not spoken to my father for a year before he died. I couldn't stand him. I was so angry with him. He was just such a prick. A very angry guy, an alcoholic. You want the list? It's the typical list.
Yeah.
And so, and then having him die without having some kind of, talk, a final confrontation of some kind was so frustrating. And I found myself writing a book that was kind of about him. It was my Stephen King novel, my Stephen King homage. It was a haunted house book called Lunar Park. It was about a man, very much like me, haunted by his father, haunted by his father's ghost. And in the end of the book, and this is not a spoiler, you can read the book and there are still plenty of surprises, but in the end of the book, he forgives his father. The character forgives his father. And I remember writing those pages. I was staying at my mother's house in Los Angeles, finishing up the book, in my childhood room. And I remember writing those pages, and I felt it all go away. I felt everything lift off me in those final pages where the character, my narrator, forgives his father. I couldn't believe the experience. I will never forget that experience. And not only that, through that forgiveness, I completely understood him. I understood him in a way that my anger never let me. I understood that about his own unhappiness and disappointments in his life, and the things that had made him such an angry man and had driven him to alcoholism, and his parents. And, you know, it just was, I have nothing but sympathy and love for my father now. And and that came through writing. It simply came through writing about him. And that's how I work through pain. I've tried to be in therapy before. I tried therapy a couple of times when I was depressed or angry about my father and didn't know what else to do. And, that really never worked. It never worked. It was a waste of time. I had to process it on my own, and a therapist never, ever helped me with that. I'm talking about maybe 2 or 3 over a lifetime. I'm not talking, I wasn't obsessed with therapy. I wasn't going to therapy all the time. But there were low moments in my life, and some of them were caused by my dad and his anger, the way he treated my mother, the way he treated me, that were just almost unbearable, and something had to be done about them. I mean, look, your parents are a big part of your life. And if one of them is terrible, it's something, and if you're young, you have to deal with it.
Why do you think we seek like therapy and external sources to sort out our own problems? Is it something coming with age, that we're getting better to think about stuff, getting distance to stuff, and like this exercise of forgiveness is really one of the most difficult things in life?
Well, writing for me has made me understand my life, has made me solve problems in my life, has made me less confused about my life. Writing about my father, for example, helped me enormously. Writing about unrequited love, someone's not loving you back that you've fallen in love with. Writing about that didn't completely solve the pain, but it did. I understood them better in a way. I understood the situation better in a way, and it did minimize the pain of something like that. I had moved to Manhattan in, I guess, the late 80s, and I was writing about a man named Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. And certainly part of the reason that I was writing about him was because I was in a society that I realized I didn't like, I did not want to be a part of, and yet I wanted, as Patrick Bateman says in the movie and in the book, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be this kind of man that was being extolled at that moment, and that was the alpha male, Wall Street, yuppie, young guy, Gordon Gekko, whatever. The primal alpha male man, which was being so was the aspirational person to be in a society. I wasn't that person. I don't want to be that person, but I'm in this world. I'm in Manhattan. I'm coming of age. I'm 23. I'm 24. I'm 25. I'm writing about Patrick Bateman, who is an example of all of my fears and all of my discontent about men and the society I'm in. And so that writing that book, for example, helped me get to a different place. It helped me get to a place of, well, I don't have to be that man. I can be another man. I don't know why I didn't think that earlier, but I guess I did have this need to want to conform to something that seemed outwardly so attractive. I mean, I see memes of Patrick Bateman. Patrick Bateman is a very attractive man. I mean, he's the clothes, that body, his apartment, his money, the women. And so why wouldn't you want to aspire to him? Well, the world that he moved through and that he was a part of was also kind of insane. And I often wonder, was Patrick Bateman insane, or was the world he was a part of insane? And that was the problem with Patrick Bateman. That's what drove Patrick Bateman mad. So anyway, this is all of a long answer about working through our pain. And instead of going to therapy and instead of seeking out therapy, I write about stuff in my life that's causing me pain, and that turns into a novel. And that is how I've always worked. I also think you're right about one thing. I think you're right about age. Age mellows you out. It just simply does. And I'm far more able to forgive someone at 58 than I was at 28 or at 38. I care a lot less about a lot of things now than I used to. The pose. I used to think there was a pose I had to have. And I think it's tied into sexual desire, and I think it's tied into sex that I felt I had to have. But at a certain point, when you kind of age out of that whole idea where you have to pose and look this way and do that, it's so freeing. It's a freeing moment for a man. It's hard to accept, but it's freeing.
Yeah, you were talking about Patrick Bateman, and we're talking about your father as well, and you said, I don't know, when the book or movie released, I'm not sure which of it, but you said Patrick Bateman was based on your father, then you later said it's based on me. Is it a combination, or?
I think that at the time when American Psycho, the book, was canceled in 1990.
Canceled how?
My publisher, who had asked me to write the book and had paid me money to write the book, I received the manuscript finally, and they said, and it took about a year for this to happen. There were immediate negative responses in the company when the manuscript for American Psycho came in January of 1990.
Okay.
My editor said, we have some controversy about this book, but I believe in it and I like it, and let me take care of this. All right, so February, March. I find out in March that the man who had done both of my hardcover, the covers for Less Than Zero and The Rules of Attraction, refused to work on American Psycho, refused to do a cover because he thought the book was the most disgusting thing he'd ever read in his life. He wanted nothing to do with it. My editor said, we'll get someone else. Don't worry about it. April, May, articles are now appearing that there is an uproar at Simon & Schuster, my publishing house, about this new novel by Bret Easton Ellis. And that some staffers are complaining that they don't think the book should be published at all, at any publisher, but not the one they're working for. This went on through the summer. I would occasionally open up a magazine and see an article about this book, American Psycho. The controversy was building and building and building. And finally, I realized, talking to my agent, my editor, that they were not going to publish the book. They were going to cancel it and get rid of me. So I knew about this about 2 weeks before it was announced publicly in November. We're now talking about 11 months later. And the publishing house issued a statement saying we have decided not to publish Mr. Ellis's third novel due to reasons of taste. It is offensive. They seem to not understand the satire of it. They seemed to take the book literally. They seemed to believe that a depiction of violence is an act of violence. A depiction of misogyny is an act of misogyny. They read it wrong. And so they canceled it. And they fired me. And they couldn't take back the advance that they'd given me, the money they'd given me. They asked me to write the novel. They said, what is your third novel? And I said, it's about a young guy who works on Wall Street who happens to also be a serial killer. We love it. We love it. That's all I told them. And they gave me a ton of money to write this book. Well, a ton of money in 1987, 86. And I had a couple bestsellers before. So anyway, but I think they thought it was going to be a different novel. I think they thought it was going to be a more traditional novel, and I think they thought it was going to be maybe have a more traditional detective, and maybe there was a girl in trouble, and that the killer would be caught, and that order would resume. And I didn't write that kind of novel. I was consumed with trying to find a way to portray madness on the page. How do you portray insanity on the page without going all Stephen King or whatever? Is it through obsessive repetition? Is it through noticing only all the clothing and what everyone's wearing? Is it a 10-page music review of Genesis? How do you get psychosis on the page in a way that is kind of original, hasn't been done before, and is not automatically obvious? And I was really obsessed by this notion. I mean, I felt I was going a little bit crazy during that time, and it's reflected in Patrick Bateman. So anyway, the book was canceled. It was picked up by a better publisher, but I also, because of the controversy and the contents of American Psycho, I was canceled by 31 publishers around the world. They all dropped me. Every single one dropped me except for one, Picador. Picador in the UK was the only publisher who kept me, but I lost every single publisher. And as my agent said, we had to start again with a new book.
What was they were so afraid of? Was it their own image or reputation?
Of course. But this was at the beginning of something else that was happening. Corporations were buying publishing houses. Corporations were buying up publishing houses and studios and entertainment systems. Gulf and Western, which owned Paramount Pictures, also, we found out, owned Simon & Schuster, my publisher. The corporation did not like the controversy. The corporation did not like the contents of the novel. They did not like seeing some of the more gratuitous sexual and violent scenes of the book taken out of context and put into magazines that vilifying me as the Prince of Darkness, evil literary bad boy, or whatever they called me. The corporation thought it was bad for their image. They didn't like it at all. And so they then told the publisher, who, admitted it to me, I'm so sorry. This is not my decision. I'm going to have to take the fall for it because they don't want it to make it look like it was their decision. They want it to make it look like it was the publisher's decision. I got to take the fall. I'm going to read a statement. I'm going to say it's my idea. But it was the corporation that owned the publishing house that canceled your book because they just didn't understand it and they didn't like the contents. So, in a weird way, you could also say maybe that was the best thing that ever happened to you, Brett. Maybe that was a great thing. I actually was young enough to be resilient to not give a shit. I really didn't care. I did notice a lot of schadenfreude among my writer friends who were my age, who told me, this is just a terrible thing. You're never going to be published by a mainstream publisher again. You're probably not going to get any writing gigs for a year and a half, which is true. No magazine approached me. No one came near me. I was fine. I was never happier. I was never happier than when the book was finally published by a better publisher, actually, who got it, who understood the book. And when they published it in March of 1991, and there were death threats. There were so many death threats. I remember there was a moment, it must have been in December, weeks after the cancellation was announced. And you have to understand, this was a very different media age. It didn't move as quickly as it does now. This controversy raged on for months and months. There were 13, 14, 15 articles in the New York Times alone about this controversy and what it means about publishing and what it means about corporations owning publishing houses. And I had received, I did not know this because they didn't have my address, hundreds of death threats because I'd written this evil, disgusting book, and they'd all been sent to my publishers. And I remember one afternoon, my agent had called me and said, they're sending down a messenger with a packet that I want you to open. He's going to be there with you. You are going to look at the packet, you are going to look at the letters, and you're going to sign a piece of paper that says you've seen them. Because if anything happens to you, and the publisher did not show you these things, they're liable. Your parents can sue them because you now have acknowledged you've seen the death threats, you are aware of them. The publisher if anything happens to you, no one can can sue your publisher because they showed them to you. You know of the threat now. That was an afternoon. That was a very strange thing to do, to look through those death threats and then to have to sign a contract saying, I have seen the death threats, have a witness there to see that I signed the thing and to acknowledge that, okay, if anything happens to me, the publisher is not liable. But anyway, that was the cancellation of American Psycho. God, I haven't told that story in quite some time and in such detail. Oh, how did we get on to that?
Yeah, I asked you about your father and who is Patrick Bateman? Your father
or you? Patrick Bateman.
That was the question.
That was the question. and instead I give you the history. Well, you can cut all that then. You can cut that whole thing.
I love that.
Patrick Bateman. Okay, look. Look, that's the backstory. So the controversy was so huge that I got a little nervous. I didn't want to be this kind of strict, moralistic writer pointing his finger at society. I like books to be interesting and complex and fun. And I think American Psycho is a hilarious book. I laughed my ass off writing it. I thought it was so fucking funny. And the fact that my publisher didn't get the humor at all was eye-opening to me. A real stunner. And so I got scared a little bit, especially being 25, 26, getting death threats, publishing dumps your novel. People tell you you're never going to get another novel published in Manhattan again. And I began to talk about Patrick Bateman as being based on my dad and the pain of my dad. And, but that's not entirely untrue either, because Patrick Bateman is a lot like my dad. And I think I was writing about my dad as much as I was writing about myself, my own unhappiness. So I did say that. And I did keep up with that for a few years. When people would ask me about Patrick Bateman, I would say, oh, yeah, base it on my dad. And then it began to shift. And I became more and more comfortable saying it was really about my pain and my confusion and where I was at a certain point in my life. And I feel comfortable now talking about that. Because of the hatred and the controversy in certain sections of the literary worlds, I couched it, I just was too careful. And I couldn't come out and say, look, Patrick Bateman is me in so many ways. And finally I could. And so that's really where he came out of. That's where all my narrators come out of. That's where all my main characters come out of. They really are me to a degree and what I'm going through at any given moment in my life. Someone asked me once, why didn't you just write a memoir? I think it'd be really interesting for you to write a memoir. What would it be like to be a young writer, get published and have a big success so early and everything? And I said, I have written a memoir. I've written 9 of them. I've written 9 memoirs. They've all been published. They are all about me at certain points in my life, about my fears, my obsessions, what's confusing me, what I'm in love with, what I fear. And so, that's just how I operate. I was just too afraid to say it about American Psycho at the time it was published. It took years and years later where I could admit that about that book.
It must be weird thinking back to the 90s and how people, and especially like the publishers, how they viewed the story and the character. And it was so provocative and controversial. They didn't want to touch it. They made such a big deal of this, obviously, in the 90s, because the view of the character was totally different then compared to now. And it's 30 years ago. So things have changed. It must be kind of weird to see like Patrick Bateman is still alive, embraced by a young audience on a total different level than...
It is. I think there was an article that my boyfriend showed me a couple of weeks ago in British GQ. It was a big picture of Christian Bale, and the headline was something along how Patrick Bateman has become the Sigma male of Generation Z, has become something along those lines. And I said, first of all, Generation Z, Sigma male. What is any of this? I don't know what any of this is. My partner's younger. He's hip to a lot of this stuff. He's 36. He knows all of this stuff. And so anyway, he was explaining to me. And it's, look, I can only take so much credit for it because ultimately the meme is of Christian Bale. And it is from the movie.
Yep.
It's not from the book. They're not memeing the book. They're memeing Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman in the movie made by Mary Harron and written by her as well. And so, it is, there's something about him that has been really ever since the movie's out. Always is, there's Patrick Bateman, GIFs and memes and stuff. Is it GIF or GIF? I keep saying whatever. What do you think it is? GIF or GIF? GIF.
Good question.
GIF. Anyway, one of those things. And
GIF.
so there's always been like, the business card scene has been done to death in every possible way with cats. With actual cats giving business cards. It's been done 1,000 times. So I don't know how much credit I can take for this because it really is from the film. And there is something about Christian Bale, I guess, being so outwardly good looking and strong and masculine and feeling so utterly shitty inside. I think there's something about that people fantasize about or connect with. I don't know. I mean, how do I feel about it? I feel about the reemergence of Patrick Bateman as some kind of relevant character in the culture, like I do with most of my career. It really doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I don't care. And I'm not saying that in some sort of flippant way. I just really don't care. I have the older you get, and you're still quite young at 42. You're not there yet.
Thank you.
The older you get, it is a kind of pragmatism, a kind of practicality, the tangible reality of your life, and not these books you've written, become the real focus of your daily thoughts and what you concentrate on. Aging parents, big thing.
Yeah.
Big thing. My boyfriend had major addiction issues and was in rehab for 4 months. And this is the first time I've been away from him. Now it'll be for 2 weeks. And I'm concerned. Now, he seems to be okay, but we both had this talk. And that was very worrisome to me. And I also have, and I've talked about this a lot also, I'm having pipe problems in my apartment. In my kitchen and in my guest bathroom and in my bathroom. There's a very old building and the pipes need to be replaced and the wrong pipes were put in and then the new pipes couldn't fit with the shower, whatever. That's what I'm thinking about. So I don't mean to be flippant at all. I don't mean to be dismissive at all. But I think less and less and less of my career and what it's about and Patrick Bateman than I ever have. I can come on a podcast like this and I can talk to you about it and I can talk about the past. But once we're out of here, I'm going to be texting my boyfriend, who I hope is up in LA, and ask, did B&B Plumbing finally get there? And did Clarence, the building manager, manage to plaster up the exposed pipe in the guest bathroom? That's what I'm going to do when I get out of here. I am not going to Google myself and find out what Sigma male and Patrick Bateman and Gen Z is. I would have done it 30 years ago. I would have done it. I was more interested in what people said about me and what people were saying about my books and stuff, but not now.
It's kind of weird that the character lives on beyond the story, becomes something bigger than the movie.
I see what you mean. You mean like even Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter is one, I think to a lesser degree, maybe Jack Torrance in The Shining. Played by Jack Nicholson. Yes, okay, I understand what you're saying, what you mean by that. Yeah, but I don't know what it has to do with me.
No.
Because the character of Patrick Bateman in the novel, I never could picture. I could picture the body because I knew he worked out obsessively. I could never see a face. I never saw a face with Patrick Bateman. And, you know, there was at one point, Christian Bale had been fired from the movie and Leonardo DiCaprio had been hired. He was going to do it with Oliver Stone. And this was right after Titanic blew Leo up into a major movie star. And he was asking for $20 million a picture, and suddenly he was interested in American Psycho. Leo wanted to do it. But Christian Bale had been cast, but he was not a star. Nobody knew who Christian Bale was then. He hadn't done anything yet. And so the studio fired Christian Bale, fired Mary Herron, who had written the script and was directing the movie, and hired Leo. And so I thought, okay, sure. I love the way Christian looked as Patrick Bateman. I like the way Leo looks as Patrick Bateman. That's good. But I never could think of a way they look. But anyway, this is getting back to that whole problem with how a character you've created lives way beyond. Well, first of all, it's out of your control completely. He escapes you. He escapes you and he becomes something else that you didn't intend, you didn't mean. The meaning of this character is now completely different from the meaning you intended when you wrote the book. Yeah, that's weird and rare. That's strange, but it is the movie. But if it gets people to read the book, then I'm all for it, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that's true, Patrick. And also the other problem is that I made a terrible movie deal with American Psycho. So I really, whatever ancillary, whatever Patrick Bateman writes, I've sold off in a deal that was fantastic for 1999 when we made the deal with the studio. And it was like a fantastic deal because no one else wanted it. There's only one studio was after American Psycho, and it was Lionsgate.
Yeah.
Lionsgate. And not only that, they had been optioning the book every year. They were that desperate for it in a way where we would ask for option money. That means they controlled the rights, but they didn't own the rights for a year. So they would give me a ton of money every January to make sure that year they could find a director, get an actor, get a script together. So it all together, was a lot of money, and the deal was great. But we also knew, my agents and I, oh God, let's just take this money. This is like highway robbery. They're never going to make this movie. They're never going to make it. There's no way. It's unfilmable. And I said, I know. Okay, let's take the deal. So we took the deal, and then the movie's made. And it does okay.
You didn't see the screenplay when...
Well, no, I wrote a screenplay.
You did?
Because the first director attached to American Psycho was David Cronenberg. David Cronenberg was going to direct it, and he already had a young star that I hadn't heard of yet, named a guy who was going to be a star. David Cronenberg told me he's in a movie called Thelma and Louise. His name is Brad Pitt. Oh my God. And he's going to play Patrick Bateman for me. So David Cronenberg and Brad Pitt were going to be the original people who made American Psycho. And David Cronenberg wanted me to write the script. But David Cronenberg said to me, when you write the script, first of all, I don't want any scenes in a nightclub or a restaurant. They're a pain to shoot. So cut all the nightclub and restaurant scenes. Well, that's 70% of the book. That's 70% of the book. And he said, also, I really only want to show maybe one murder. So cut out most of the violence because I'm not going to shoot it. I said, well, that's like another 10% of the book. Okay, I guess so. And then he said, oh, and also make it only about 70 pages because I shoot about a minute and a half a page. That's how I shoot. So make sure don't do an 80 or 100 page script. Do a 70 page script of this. I thought, what the fuck are you asking me to write? Why do you want to even do American Psycho? What is it about? So I wrote the script that I wanted to write. And I threw in all the violence, and I threw in all the restaurant scenes. I threw in all the club scenes, thinking maybe he'll read it and go, oh, of course I have to do it this way. No, he hated it. Absolutely hated it. Fired me and hired another writer. And he hated that script even more. And then he dropped out of the project. And then Mary Harron got involved. And so anyway, but it really is yeah.
How does your script differ from Mary's script?
Well, this is how it works. We figured out, because there were two other American Psycho scripts, one written, I believe, by Norman Snyder, and one, I believe, written by Stuart Gordon, and then there was my script, and then there was Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner's script. And I think there was one other one by one of the guys who ended up making Entourage, that TV show.
Yeah.
And I forgot what his name was.
Doug Ellis?
Wasn't Doug Ellen. Doug Ellen you're thinking of. No, it wasn't him. It was someone, a creator or producer of that show connected to it. And for some reason, his name... he made a movie called Amongst Friends, and he did a script of it, and he was a hot property in 1990 or whatever. Rob
Weiss?
Rob Weiss, thank you. Rob Weiss, who I was friends with at the time. Yes, Rob Weiss wrote a script as well. Now, everyone figured out, when you look at this 400-page novel, there is basically the same 90 to 100-page script with the scenes that you can use for a movie. Those are the scenes that you can use for a movie. And everyone knew it. And so all the scripts were kind of the same. Yes, you can use that scene, but you can't film that. You can't film that. But you can film these 30 scenes. And so my script was very, very close to Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner's. I tried to get credit for it. Rob's script was a little bit different because he ended it with Patrick Bateman turning into like Godzilla, a giant Patrick Bateman stomping over Manhattan, tearing down skyscrapers. And so he went a little bit more surreal. So he was out of the running for the credit for the final film. But the final film had so much of my dialogue in it. And every line of dialogue is from the book in Mary's film. And everyone says, oh, Mary Harron did such a brilliant job reimagining American Psycho. Every single scene and every line of dialogue is from my novel. It is my dialogue. And yet Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner get credit, and I get no credit as the screenwriter. I didn't win the arbitration. We have these things in America called arbitrations because there are usually so many drafts of a screenplay as a movie's being developed that often 10 writers have worked on a film or rewritten stuff or whatever. And so in order to get the credit on the screen, it goes through a process and where the Writers Guild of America has like a panel of 4 people going over all of the scripts, and then they decide who gets the credit. And I lost. Wow. I didn't get credit. So anyway, even though it's so similar to my script.
Was that intimidating, or did you get mad? Or
no, I didn't get. It was frustrating a little bit, and it also means money. You get money. You get residuals. You have, and if you don't get that credit, you don't get those residuals.
So you have no royalties from that movie?
No, I don't.
Oh my God,
I don't. Because, well, look, if we had only known, and I had the best agents in Hollywood at that point.
Okay,
I had the best agents in Hollywood who said, "We've gotten you a fantastic deal. Take it. They'll never make the movie."
That's the thing. When we talked about Entourage, that's the thing I learned about Entourage, that like 90% of scripts in Hollywood, even more maybe, are never made. It's just
98%.
98%.
98% of all scripts are not made. You have a 2% chance of your script being made into a movie. That's actually the same percentage as, I think, as books that are bought to be turned into movies. Yeah. It's about the same thing. It's about 98% of books are bought, they're optioned, they're developed, they're never turned into movies. It is a very bad business. Now, you see successful people. You see someone like Doug Ellen, who made a successful TV show. There are 1,000 of Doug Ellens who did not make it in Hollywood. And then there are the people who, like me, when I decided to go out there, what I call the casino, because it's a gambler's life out there. You're gambling all the time. You think you're going to hit the big pot. You think you're going to get the ace king poker, whatever. You think you're going to win. You think you're going to win in the casino. And so I went out there for 14 years because I wanted to direct. I had always written screenplays, and I wanted to direct screenplays, and I wanted to create TV shows. I wanted to create a miniseries because I believed the miniseries was the new novel. And I'd written plenty of novels, and so I wanted to do that. And I had a big deal at HBO when I first went out there in 2007, 2008. And they were making a massive movie out of a book of short stories of mine called The Informers. I don't know if that's called The Informers here or whatever, but it's a book of my short stories set in LA in the early 80s. The huge cast with like Mickey Rourke and Billy Bob Thornton and all these young up and coming stars. Amber Heard is the lead girl in it. Totally naked, by the way. That might be a reason why you want to watch The Informers. Totally naked while taking a huge hit off a bong while riding some guy. So that movie, which I produced and I wrote, and they had to buy the book from me, much better deal than for American Psycho, but a flop of a movie. So there's the other irony. I got paid a fortune and I had a fantastic deal on The Informers, and it flopped and it shut down its studio. It cost so much money.
Wow. About
$25 million, which was a lot of money for an independent film. But anyway, so I went out there, and I had grown up in LA. Many of my friends' parents worked in the industry. We all knew you don't want to be a screenwriter in LA. You want to be a filmmaker. So it was being a screenwriter was never the option. It was always becoming a filmmaker. And many of my friends, when we graduated from high school, they went to film school and they got into the business. And I was writing novels and thought, okay, well, I want to get out of LA for a while. I'm going to go to college way back east to a place with a pretty good writing program because I am interested in writing this novel. And then when I do that, I'll come back and I'll make movies with you guys. We'll all form a production company or whatever, all my friends. So, so I knew what the dangers were. But in 06 or 07, TV was really blowing up and really getting good. And it seemed to me that people were reading fewer and fewer novels, and I really didn't have a novel in me. I didn't have one in me. I had a lot of ideas for TV shows, a lot of ideas for movies. I was selling them. I was selling these ideas, and I was being paid to write them. And you get kind of caught up in a system where you think, oh, the next one will happen because you pitch to a studio. This is my idea for a TV show. And they go, we love it. What's your price? We'll pay it. Write it, have it in by this time. You do it. Then you get the notes. You go, okay, these notes are okay. You incorporate the notes. And then you begin to realize, oh, you're getting a second set of notes. And then you realize you're not talking to the first line producer. You're talking to the third executive producer. And then you're talking to the assistant, and you begin to realize, oh, they're not doing this. Okay, well, I have to finish these notes that completely contradict the original notes and the whole notion of the idea. Okay, so that dies. But your price goes up a little bit because you worked in the script. So you sell another thing to another company. And this is what I did for years and years and years. I must have written 30,000 pages of scripts that never got made. I wrote a couple of horror movies off that were nothing that did get made. One I haven't even watched called The Curse of Downers Grove, which was originally called Downers Grove, which had a lot of people interested in it. And then, of course, like most movies, just didn't move forward. I had people like Gus Van Sant and Gaspar Noé. Ryan Gosling wanted to star in a script of mine, and Naomi Watts and Joaquin Phoenix, and nothing happened.
All this gossip all the time, and
nothing happens. We made The Canyons. I made The Canyons, a low-budget movie with Paul Schrader, starring Lindsay Lohan, and the porn star James Dean. That got made, but my Oscar-winning scripts did not get made, and it's just that's how it worked. And so, at a certain point in 2019, I had a big deal at Legendary, and I had a deal at Hulu, and the same thing was happening. I began to sense, you begin to smell it. You begin to see that, oh, I'm not talking to the first executive. I'm now talking to the third executive. I'm not talking to the head executive. I'm talking to a subordinate, and I'm getting these new notes, and these new notes are contradicting the old notes. And it was happening at both places with both projects. And I called my agent and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. Nothing's getting made. Nothing is getting made. I think I'm going crazy, and I think I'm going to take a break, so you don't need to represent me anymore. I'm going to publish this book, White, a collection of essays. That'll keep me going for a while. I don't live an extravagant lifestyle. I have friends who have 3 kids in private schools and mortgages and alimony, and they do need to do this. They do need to work in Hollywood to make money, to pay for all this stuff. I don't have to worry about that. And so I said, I'm out of here. And so I published a book called White, which is an essays on Generation X. And actually, it's one long essay on Generation X divided into 8 parts. That also, I mean, I'm glad I quit Hollywood, because Hollywood was so upset with me over this book that I lost some gigs that I was going to leave anyway. And then what happened? Lockdown, 2020. So I guess I'm just trying to bring you up to pace on whatever I've been doing and why I haven't published a book in 13 years, and why Hollywood was a disaster, as it is for everybody. I am sure Steven Spielberg right now is incredibly upset that he has made 2 gigantic financial failures in a row that must have lost the studio, I would say, upward of $300 million in terms of production and marketing costs. Both West Side Story and The Fabelmans have made no money at all, because people aren't going to the theaters to see movies like that. They're going to see the new Avatar movie, of course, $2 billion. They're going to see Top Gun Maverick. They're not going to see adult dramas. They're just not. They get that on TV from their streaming services, but they're not going to theaters to pay $15 to go sit in a theater and watch a drama like that anymore. Those movies will not be released theatrically next year. These Oscar movies, you know, the movies that are all.
It must be strange for you, for like you were a successful novelist.
Yeah.
And you had experience also doing a podcast. And you know, from idea to actually publish or creating stuff, it's like there's no boundaries. It's like no things standing in your way.
Right.
You can do it in your own tempo. It's the best lifestyle. Still, creative people love to do like the impossible, to get that screenplay, to get their name on that movie.
Absurd. It's absurd. It really is winning the lotto. Getting a movie made is a miracle. It's a miracle. And I am shocked that there was a movie, the last movie made from a script of mine was a movie called The Smiley Face Killers. And it was a horror film that I wrote because I started a production company many, many years ago with a producing partner of mine. And in typical Hollywood fashion, we have not spoken in years because we had a falling out over a movie. And so I had written this movie, a low-budget horror film, and we thought, yes, a low-budget horror film is what's going to make us a lot of money. Let's go, because they do make money. Horror movies do make a lot of money. Okay. And they're the safest bet in Hollywood. The safest bet in Hollywood is the horror movie. And so I wrote that script and then completely forgot about it. And then I got a call about, 5 years later. My agent said, you remember that script you wrote called the Smiley Face Killers? And I said, yeah, they're going to start shooting that in Vegas next month. And they want to know how much they should pay you for it. What should I ask? And so it was like my Oscar-winning script about the young tragic artist who commits suicide because my Star is Born Art World movie isn't getting made. The Smiley Face Killers is getting made. That's Hollywood. So it all came together for that movie, I guess, and it was cheap enough to make. It's an interesting film. I mean, you can find it online, but it was, that's how it works.
Have you ever considered or been tempted to like do a spin-off or prequel of American Psycho? Because
I don't own the rights.
you can't do anything. You don't own the rights to the.
I don't own the rights to Patrick Bateman. I sold the rights to Patrick Bateman when I sold the rights for all that money in 1999. So Patrick Bateman is a character that I do not own. I can write a novel, however. I can write a novel perhaps with the approval of Lionsgate, because I had a problem with my novel Lunar Park. In Lunar Park, my novel from 2005, the haunted house novel where I ultimately forgave my father, the creator of Patrick Bateman is Brett Ellis, and he's the narrator of Lunar Park. It's kind of auto-fiction. And he is haunted by Patrick Bateman. He's haunted by someone in this town he's moved into is committing the crimes that were committed in American Psycho and in the vein of Patrick Bateman. And so, and there is a Patrick Bateman-like character. Got into a lot of trouble with Lionsgate. They said, you don't own Patrick Bateman. You can't use Patrick Bateman that way. Now, I could in the book. So we figured it out, but I couldn't. If they ever made Lunar Park into a movie, they would have to eliminate that, or Lionsgate would have to make it. So first of all, I don't have anything to do with that. And there are many, many attempts at making American Psycho, the TV show. I hear about them all the time. I'm not involved. They don't ask me to be involved. Lionsgate owns this. I know that the last time they were trying to do this, it was with a woman, Patricia Bateman. Patricia Bateman.
The Ghostbusted,
they were going to change that. No, I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And there was going to be a Black American Psycho with there's going to be whatever. There's always an American Psycho TV series in development. I hear about them all the time. I get calls from my agent going, I know we'll try to get you an executive producer credit on it or something, but no. So I also don't have an urge to go back to that character at all.
No.
I'm in a different place in my life. I cannot imagine what you would have to pay me to write it. I know that I was interested in doing a graphic novel, a comic book, a couple of comic books with this really, really cool company called Zoom, based in Los Angeles. And we were talking about doing a couple of graphic novels of where's Patrick Bateman, I don't know now and whatever. And they found this really cool artist, but then the rights situation came up and it was like, forget it, we can't do it. So anyway, that case is closed. I'm not ever going back to Patrick Bateman, and I have no intention of doing it.
Do you remember the process of creating the character, like shaping the character? Did the character come before the story, or was the story before the character?
The idea for American Psycho was going to be much more conventional.
Okay.
It was going to be kind of a trilogy, the third part of a trilogy of Less Than Zero, The Rules of Attraction, and American Psycho, which was going to be about a young man very unhappy on Wall Street, and he's doing too much cocaine, and he's having an affair with another woman, but he has a fiance. He gets caught up in a bad business arrangement. A very conventional Wall Street novel, but set in the late 80s and about Manhattan in the 80s and all of that stuff. I started to do research and hanging out with these guys in Manhattan. I had a couple friends who had older brothers who worked on Wall Street, and I started hanging out with them in 1986 and 87, going out to dinners with them. They never wanted to meet in their offices. We never met at any of the buildings they worked in. We would meet at hot spots, like a cool bar or a restaurant. And I would kind of ask them about their jobs and what they did, because I was new to this. I really didn't know how these young men who were 26, 27, just out of business school were making fortunes in the late 80s. What was going on? What I learned by hanging out with them is that they were much more interested in their clothing and who was dating the hottest girl. All this status symbol about stereos and the best gym to work out in and who had the best abs and where was the best tanning salon? Where's the hippest place to rent in the Hamptons for the summer? All of this stuff. And it was like, whoa, these guys, and they were so preening. They were like I don't know if you call it a dandy, like the dandies of the 18th century, you know, the very stylish men, the very dapper men. And they were so into their bodies and their haircuts and their facial regimes and everything. It was really it was almost as if heterosexual male society had suddenly taken all the tropes from gay male society. Very concerned about their body, the gym stuff. It really seemed like heterosexual men had then now adopted what had been really a gay lifestyle and a gay way of looking and of presenting themselves. I thought, oh, that's interesting. That might be more interesting than the novel that I'm working on. And then one night while I was having dinner with 6 of them, out of the blue, out of nowhere, I'm looking at them. They're talking and they're talking. And I think, Patrick Bateman's a serial killer. He's a serial killer, or he thinks he's a serial killer. Boom. The novel instantly became something different. And I said, it's from the point of view of an insane person. Patrick Bateman's insane. He is going to be narrating the novel. How do I put insanity on the page? What's his voice going to be like? And so I spent a year on an outline doing many variations of Patrick Bateman's voice, trying to find out what I liked best. He was obviously going to be obsessive. He was going to notice all of this stuff, but it was going to be the wrong stuff, because if you look at all the clothes that he talks about and that people are wearing, if you actually saw them wearing the jackets, the shirts, the ties that he's saying someone is wearing, it would look crazy. It would be the wrong tie, the wrong jacket, the wrong shirt, the wrong shoes, everything. So, and also, then the book came together, and he came together. They both mutually came together at the same time. And he is the book because he is the voice of the book. And I wanted the book to be a reflection of him. So that's how it happened. That's how American Psycho happened. And it took about 3 years to write.
Very interesting. The author of Fight Club, what's his
Chuck Palahniuk.
Yeah. He had a great episode on Joe Rogan, I remember. And he talked about his craft and how he structured things. I love to hear about those things. And he said, for people listening, up to Act 3 is a moment of crisis. Most authors, writers, creators start with the ending. He liked not to know how the crisis must be solved. Did you make the ending of American Psycho early in the process, or it just happened?
How did he get on Joe Rogan? And why haven't I gotten on Joe Rogan?
How
did Chuck Palahniuk get on Joe Rogan and I haven't been on Joe Rogan?
Why haven't you been on Joe Rogan?
I don't know.
Have you tried?
What was the question again? Look. Everyone has their own way of working.
Yeah.
There's no right way of working on a novel. There's no textbook that tells you how to write a novel. Everyone writes a novel differently. I could not imagine working on a novel like Chuck, who I know and I respect. I cannot imagine it. The problem is that working that way is a big risk, because you can reach page 152 and realize you don't have a novel. You don't know where to go. It's not working. My first draft is an outline. And in that outline, I really pretty much have the entire movement of the novel. And I'm now pretty sure I'm going to commit 2 to 3 years to write this book, because I like this outline. I know exactly where I'm going. I know exactly from A to B to D to F to H, everything. Everything is laid out before I begin writing the book. And that makes it so much more pleasurable and easy, and I'm comfortable with it. I don't know what Chuck needs to be surprised by when you're writing a novel. I mean, I just want to have fun. I am in a relaxed state writing a novel. I'm in a state of often bliss. I'm so happy I have a novel. You don't know what it's like for a writer to have a novel. It's wonderful. I hadn't had one for so long, and I love getting up in the morning and go into my office and meeting my friend, my new friend, my lover.
Yeah.
And it is great. And so, but for me, it's pleasurable because I have the entire thing laid out. I know exactly where I'm going. Oh, I might move one or two things around here. And there was one or two scenes in the shards that I thought up in the middle that I added at the end. But more or less, I knew exactly where I'm going with every novel. American Psycho was outlined to death because it had no narrative. It had no plot. And yet it had to move. It had to move, and so the gradations of dread and terror and violence, I realized had to be laid out and choreographed in a way so that you would keep the novel moving, that it would keep moving, and it wouldn't just be so static. So that outline was almost 200 pages long in terms of how that book, that was the most tightly structured book I've ever worked on because nothing seemingly happens in it. There is no plot. There is just a random sequence of events in Patrick Bateman's life for 400 pages. It covers about 2 years of his life. So I've always worked with an outline. Less Than Zero, as short as it was, had an outline that was probably 50 pages long in terms of like what I want to happen in a scene. Stuff I'm not even going to put in the scene. I have question marks about what is she thinking right now and why is, and then there's also things that I get wrong. And Imperial Bedrooms was a novel I wrote. Basically a nonfiction account of the making of The Informers and my breakdown in Hollywood. It's my Hollywood horror novel. I had a big outline for that book too, and that book's only 160 pages. So they helped me clarify the narrator's voice because I always use a narrator. I'm always having someone narrate my books. They're never in third person. And so that outline helps me immensely. And I think, look, Chuck is a successful writer. So he knows what works for him. And then I have my way of working and it works for me.
Story without a plot. I guess Robert McKee has a name for that. Don't you think?
Robert McKee is full of crap. I'm sorry. I don't believe this whole notion of being taught to write the screenplay. You know, it's just, he's a huckster, you know, he
got some good points about creating a story historically from the Greeks, don't you think?
No, I don't. I don't agree. I don't agree with it at all. No, I don't think that's necessarily true, and that's necessarily why I like movies. I also don't think that the screenplay is really, and you learn this, has anything to do in a lot of ways why a movie is good. Why movies are great are a director. Their director. The director sees something in the screenplay and readapts the screenplay for his vision. So what you're offering the director is a blueprint for a movie, and they make it into their vision of it. So that's the other reason why being a screenwriter is ridiculous and taking screenwriting classes is ridiculous. You want to be a director. Write your own screenplay and then direct it. I don't understand the purpose of the screenwriting class. I did when screenwriting was a very profitable thing and there were spec script deals going on for $3 million, $2 million, $4 million
before,
back in the 80s and the 90s, back in that time. Hey, start a screenwriting class and charge people $2,000 to come in. I'll teach you how to write a screenplay. Those days are over. I mean, that's not happening. People aren't buying scripts like that anymore at all. So I don't know really what the point is. I think you just, you know, yes, screenplays are about structure. That is true. I've read many, 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 many screenplays. They are about structure and well, who knows? Maybe if I took Robert McKee, some of those movies would have gotten made. I don't know. Now you're making me think about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe Robert McKee has a point. Maybe I should have taken one or two classes. But he doesn't take into account the business. That's the problem.
Yeah.
He's talking about it like, you write this script, it will be bought. You write the script this way, it will be made. You write the script this way. The business doesn't think like that. It doesn't work like that.
All the things he's trying to say is not about screenplays precisely. It's more about like the story, if it's like a play, a novel. There's some principle and ground rules in his eyes how to write a story. And
well, he would hate American Psycho, I can tell you that. Well, I got to tell you, Quentin Tarantino is a great screenwriter, and he hates Robert McKee and thinks all of those rules are bullshit, and that he writes his screenplays like it's a novel. And his screenplays are like novels. They don't have 1 act, 2 act, 3 acts. He doesn't believe in it. He just says, I'm writing exactly. Someone said, why are you opening with a 23-minute scene in Inglourious Basterds? What are you doing? He said, because I love it. And I'm going to shoot. I have a way of shooting. It's going to be suspenseful. It's going to work. And they go, no one starts a movie with a 23-minute scene. He said, well, I am. This is how I write. And I'm not going to and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to have this long scene with these people in a bar with, all use these suspense mechanisms. Quentin Tarantino throws all those rules out and he makes some of the best movies. True. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood would drive Robert McKee insane. It would drive him insane. So I don't know. And we can agree to differ on that.
Maybe it's like being a screenplay guru. It's
a screenplay guru, even that.
Yeah,
thing
drives
me crazy.
I know. It's like it sounds very good, but maybe some of that business is driven by the after fact explanations and confirmation bias. You cherry pick the good movies and take them apart and say, look at this structure. It's perfect laid out. It's blah blah blah, and it's.
I very rarely do. I think our scripts the reason why I love a movie. It just isn't. Maybe that's because I've written so many of them. I don't know. It's not. It's more the filmmaker's vision. It's the way he shoots it, and that's why the spectacle of it all, and the script, of course, can help, but I just do not see. I don't see film as a writer's medium. I see it as a director's medium. I see novels as a writer's medium, but I don't see film as a writer's medium. Television. Differently. I do begin to see that the writer is the showrunner. The writer really is the authorial voice of the show. For a film, I don't know. I think it's a director. And of course now it's changing because it's all becoming one big form of content.
But the TV series, the biggest, what else? You remember True Detective, the first season?
Yeah.
There was this, Nick
He's a good friend of mine, Nick Pizzolatto, yes.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine.
Cool. So he wrote the whole series himself.
Yeah, he did.
And you can feel it in the show. It's like so consistent, and that bothers me with some other good shows that I know that there's several writers on different episodes. They have a different kind of feel. It doesn't feel. It could be a good show, but it doesn't have that consistent feel of like True Detective was a very good example for me. Like this has the same nerve and this feel like a very long movie, a very long novel, just written by one guy who knows everything about this universe.
They're doing that more and more.
That's
They're doing it more and more. Yeah, Mike White with The White Lotus is an example. I'm going to do it with The Shards. I'm going to write every episode of that.
Is that going to be a TV show?
Well, is it? That's the question. I mean, it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't talk about who's doing it. I can't say that, but my deal is done. My deal is done, and the director's deal is done. I can't mention who the director is either. Okay. So it is, and it is less expensive also for a studio to have one writer than to have a writer's room and to pay 5 or 6 writers. So they really do want a writer to have that. It's not only about, yes, you're going to get a more consistent voice, it's also economics. It's also economics because it's more expensive to have a writer's room. So, yes, this is a thing that's becoming more and more, and I see it more and more when I'm watching miniseries. Sometimes, though, shows are complicated and they do need writers' rooms, and they do need to, in order to get these shows produced and put on the air at a certain schedule, you do need 4 or 5 main writers. I think Succession has a great set of writers working on it. And the voice of that show seems to be very, very sure of itself and very, very even. And I think there are shows that do have writers' rooms that do work. But I think you're going to see more and more what Nick Pizzolatto did with True Detective. That really was like one of the first times where, oh wow, this is a miniseries where someone wrote every single episode.
So how it's going with Nick and True Detective? Or is it still?
He's not doing the new one. The new one he has nothing to do with. So he is not doing the I guess it's the fourth season of True Detective. There was the second, the fourth season of True Detective. I don't think he's doing it. He's not doing it. He's working on some other shows, and I saw him in LA right before Christmas, and he lives in Texas now. He moved out of Los Angeles and is living in Austin.
Together with the tech guys?
I guess tech guys and, a lot of people fled LA. I mean, a lot of people left LA. A lot of my best friends, a lot of my good friends, James Van Der Beek, the actor, who, lives close by to Nick Pizzolatto in Austin, Texas.
So, your new novel is out, The Shards.
What's it about?
Well, basically, if I am just going to tell you what The Shards is about on a very basic level, it's about a group of high school students. They go to a very prestigious prep school in LA called the Buckley School. It's a private school. They're all fairly wealthy. There's about 5 or 6 of them that the book concentrates on. A new student arrives, and one of the other students, the narrator of the book, is automatically suspicious of him. There's something off about this new guy. And our narrator becomes convinced that he is somehow connected, that this new guy is somehow connected to a serial killer that has begun operating in the San Fernando Valley, called the Trawler. And our narrator, who is one of these kids, begins to piece together all of these clues about this new boy and is positive that he is the serial killer. Now, also going on is this rather large teenage drama, relationship drama. People are breaking up. It does have a lot of tropes of the traditional high school novel. There's the golden couple. There's the closeted jock. There's the druggy rich girl. And there's the narrator who is closeted and has a girlfriend and is the one who is fantasizing about the new boy being this serial killer. And that is the engine of the novel. And the serial killer, the Trawler, seems to be getting closer and closer to this group of friends. And Brett, the narrator, is convinced that one of their classmates has in fact been killed by the Trawler in a kind of ritualistic, kind of cult-like slaying, but it is being presented to the school and to everyone as an accident, that he slipped, he fell in the pool, he tried to gash his arm, but in fact, it was all part of a ritualistic murder. And so anyway, and it's also about 1980 because I said it the year that I went to high school. And it's about Los Angeles in that era. It's about the clubs we went to. It's about the movie theaters and the malls. And it's kind of a historical fiction about LA. But at the same time, it is being, a lot of people talk about it as if it's a slasher teen horror novel with a serial killer looming larger and larger as the book moves forward. But my main impulse was write about my time as a teenager, as a 17-year-old in high school, and what that was like.
Could you take us back to, especially for the young listeners, who probably don't have any more references than a couple of 80s movies. How was the 80s in Los Angeles? Can you describe a day for the character?
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, that we're talking about the end of the 70s and we're talking about the very dawn of the 80s. The book takes place in 81, which is a very different year than the mid-80s, than the John Hughes 80s. 81 is really still the 70s, and it really wasn't until Ronald Reagan became president and the fashion started changing because of MTV. MTV had a big, big impact on fashion, and this was pre-MTV. So the Shards is still kind of in the 70s. It is 81, but the kids don't have, the boys don't have mullets, and there's no shoulder pads, and the girls don't have the crazy frizzy hair that so many of the women had in the mid 80s. So it is, I just want to preface this by saying that It was very, very different from, I think, the cliched idea that we have of the 80s from certain movies from that decade. So the Shards is nothing like that. But I think you're asking about what was an average day like for a teenager at that time?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have a phone. We woke up and we looked at our clock. We looked at our clock and maybe we picked up a book. Maybe we laid there. I don't know. I've gotten a lot of flack for having so much sex in this book, but there is, and both with men and women and with boys and boys, and there's a lot of masturbation. There's a lot of jerking off in this book because it's narrated by a 17-year-old guy. And some critics have complained about this and have said there is way too much masturbation in this book, way too much sexual fantasy. I'm sorry, at 17, I think I downplayed it in this book, actually. And if you're going to have a book narrated by a 17-year-old guy and have it be authentic and have it be true, you're going to have to add that in. So, it was simpler. It was a more free life. You had a freer life than I think you have now. You weren't told what to say. You weren't told what to do necessarily in terms of ideology, in terms of language, and having to be careful about jokes. We wanted to be offended. We loved dirty movies. We loved things like Blue Velvet, which would never be made today. We wanted to be challenged and shocked. That is what we wanted. We liked being offended, which of course today can't do any of that today. So it was a very different vibe in terms of freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom. It was, and I think I was reminded, I wanted to write this book 40 years ago when I was 18, when all of this stuff was happening to me, and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't have the talent for it at 18 or 19. And I do think part of the reason that it started stirring within me in the last 3 or 4 years was the nostalgia that time was better. That 2020 was an awful year, and 2021 was an awful year. And even the years preceding that were pretty awful. I don't know. I think maybe the awfulness of those years was what made me go back to 1981, when it was pretty great. It was a lot better. But anyway, so the average day, I don't know. We were mobile. We had cars. You had to have a car as a teenager in LA. Cheap car, nice car, whatever. You needed a car. And so you got your cars in LA at 15 and a half. That's when you got your learner's permit. So you were driving at 16. And you wanted to be an adult. You wanted to be an adult. You didn't want to cosplay at Comic-Con for the rest of your life and just sit around playing Final Fantasy 17 for 18 hours. You wanted to become an adult and enter into the world of sex, relationships, career, because you were living in an adult world made by adults for adults. There was no kiddie land around. There was not like 80 Disney movies opening. There was not helicoptering parents. There was not people telling you can't say this, you can't do that. That's a bad word, honey. No one asks, oh, what do you want for dinner? Or are you feeling okay? Or whatever. It wasn't that way. It was an adult world. And because of that, we grew up faster. And I think that it was a huge difference between now and then. We weren't walking on eggshells. I mean, I would find it terrifying to be a young person or a teenager now. Maybe not terrifying, but still there would be something about me as a young artist, because I was a writer then, that I would feel constricted. I would feel somewhat censored. I don't think I could publish or write the things that I wanted to write about, or that I did write about in my high school days, and have it be accepted.
Is it easier and more stimulating to write from eras where we didn't have the internet or the mobile phone, back in the days when there's not so much technology noise in the social situations?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. That's not why I wrote the book, and that's not one of the reasons why I was attracted to even writing the book. But I did have a conversation with Quentin Tarantino, who loved The Shards. And he said to me, you were doing the same thing that I did with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You don't want to write about where we are now, do you? Because it sucks, right? And I said, yeah, I guess so. You want to write about your childhood like I did with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I said, yeah, I guess I did. He said, I want to write about that moment when I was a child and the Manson family, that fucking cult scared the hell out of me. It really traumatized all of us growing up in LA, the Manson murders. And I think Quentin, in his way, with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, felt a way how to resolve it or process it. And he also said to me, and didn't it feel so fucking good that you didn't have to have a fucking cell phone in The Shards? That's how I felt with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. God, wasn't that so freeing? And I said, I guess now that you mention it, it was. So you're right. Yes, the cell phone. I mentioned this in The Shards in a scene where the main character goes to see The Shining the weekend it opens in Westwood. And he goes there early. It's an early morning show. It just opened in May. I remember this because I talk about the opening of The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick movie, on May 24th, 1980. And I remember going to that theater, and I wanted to go to the 10 a.m. showing because it was only opening in 3 theaters in LA, an exclusive engagement before opening wider a month or two later. That's how a lot of movies open. And I was afraid the 1 o'clock or the 4 o'clock were going to be way too crowded. So I drove to the 10 a.m. and I got there at 9:30, parked in an empty parking lot in Westwood, bought my ticket, went into the theater. The movie was starting for about 20 minutes, and I sat there. I looked at the screen. I didn't have a phone or anything. It was 1980. I didn't have a phone. Looked at the screen. I thought about my life. I thought about the boy I liked. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling. It was really beautiful. I always loved this theater. Looked around to see how many people had come in. Oh, it was about half filled. Okay, yeah, it's an early morning show. I looked at my box of Junior Mints, and I had one. And I just took in the theater and thought about my life and school on Monday. And I purposefully had the scene in The Shards as a reminder of how different things are. He says in it, and I can't believe writing this now. I just sat there for 20 minutes without a phone and just thought about my life and the world.
And doing that now, people would freak out if their battery on the phone is out.
Of course. I would freak out. I would freak out. I am the age I am. I'm 58. But the last thing I look at before I go to bed is that phone. The first thing I look at in the morning is the phone. Now, I am not on it as much as my boyfriend is, who's on it far more often. He's connected to it in a way that I'm not. I was not. He's been connected with it longer as technology has been a bigger part. The digital age has been a much bigger part of his life than it has with mine. I'm part analog, still an analog guy in a lot of ways, much more than he will ever be.
I'm dreaming of getting rid of my cell phone.
How can you? It's your lifeline to everything. Yeah. I panic. I forgot my phone. I had to drive over to my mom and my stepdad's place out over in the valley. It's about a 25-minute ride over the canyons in LA. I live in West Hollywood, and I drive over the canyons. And sometimes on a Sunday, there are no other cars out on the canyons, and I'm like the only car going over the canyons. And I didn't have my phone. I forgot my phone for some reason. I don't know why I didn't pick it up on my office, but I was in a hurry. And I started panicking, thinking, what if something happens in the canyon? What if the car breaks down? I don't have a phone. What am I going to do? Wave down a car? There are no cars. And I realized, God, how vital the phone is. I mean, I don't know. I was looking at it when I came up in the elevator to see you. I was texting something about my plumbing.
They made us so addicted. And
we are addicted. But I have to tell you, there have been times in my life when I've been in a hurry. I've gone out, I'm in the car, I'm halfway down the street, I've got to get someplace, and I realize, shit, I left my phone in the fucking office again. And then I think about it. Give it a shot. See how the day goes without it. See how your day goes without a phone. I know you have to do all these errands. You've got to get to the bank. You're not going to really need the phone for anything. Try it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I've enjoyed those days. I just can't forcibly do it. I can't bring myself to do it. So it's always an accident, a wonderful accident when it happens. But I can tell you, it's like, God, not looking at it every fucking 4 minutes, walking through a mall. Yes, that is life. That's how it should be.
I know. I tried to downgrade my phone to like iPhone 5 or 6
No.
with the short battery time, and it was so slow, and I couldn't do anything on it. But it just frustrated me even more. It's like,
No, you might as well. I have the most updated phone, and it has to be. I've gotten too impatient. No.
But hey, it was great talking to you, Brett, and thank you for coming.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. And if you're ever in LA, you can be in my podcast.
I'll write that down.
All right.
Thank you
Good.
so much.
Thank you.